I would like to start my address by thanking the Schiller Institute for this opportunity to address your esteemed conference. I'm sorry I'm not going to be with you because I will be traveling. And I would like to start, my speech by giving a brief synopsis about the Oasis plan, because later my discussion or deliberation will be about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and how that will be in the context of a plan that will really bring peace, security, and justice through economic development and through ties between North and South and what have you. And allow me to start by shedding a brief light on the Oasis plan sponsored by the Schiller Institute under the title LaRouche Solution for Peace Through Development Between Israel and Palestine and for all Southwest Asia. Peace through economic development is the only successful basis for lasting just peace in the Middle East region. There is no purely military basis for peace or security, and military solution has never been a solution. So there is no purely military basis for peace or security. Only development is essential. However, the greatest impediment to development in our region, which is the Middle East region and Southwest Asia, is the shortage of fresh water, as everybody knows. Because if we don't solve this problem, the next war in the Middle East is going to be over water resources. And through the construction of network of desalination plants, ideally nuclearly powered, that could turn the seawater into fresh water. These plants could connect the Red Sea with the Dead Sea and the Dead Sea with the Mediterranean, as it is outlined in the plan. And it will only come about by rejecting power politics, rejecting geopolitics, and building a new paradigm shift of international relations that is based on a new concept of economic development, i.e., will prevail security and development. As Helga Zepp-LaRouche once said, I'm quoting, "You have to have hope and give the youth a decent future to have a normal life of doing useful things." This plan should be applicable to the Palestine-Israel conflict for its finality and for its duration of longevity for peace and security. And now let me shed light on the current situation in Palestine. I think it is important to know the magnanimity of this great conflict that has been affecting the entire world. And as you can see, it has swept all over the world with public opinion that is becoming more and more aware of what the Palestinians are going through in Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. Israel's ongoing apocalyptic military campaign against Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem comes on top of 76 years of persecution, displacement, and genocide. It has resulted in mass destruction. It has resulted in displacement of over 90% of the Gazan population and the deaths and maiming of tens of thousands of innocent civilians. Mostly, as you know, are women and children. All this amounts to the alert observers as war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. Palestinians have been killed in their thousands when homes, schools, hospitals, shelters, mosques, churches, refugee camps have been mercilessly bombed. That is rooted in an ethno-nationalist settler colonial ideology, in continuation of decades of purging. In a nutshell, this is a textbook case of genocide. For the past 250 days, Israel has conducted a sustained campaign of airstrikes targeting civilians in Gaza. And in the latest escalation, around 210 Palestinians have been massacred, with over 400 wounded at Al-Nusayrat refugee camp in central Gaza. The death toll stands at approximately more than 37,000 to date, with half of the victims being children. Tragically, over 10,000 martyrs are believed to be trapped under the rubble of destroyed buildings. This dire situation is exacerbated by the loss of almost 147 UN personnel and the destruction of 32 hospitals, leaving only a few operational facilities with limited resources. Furthermore, all educational institutions, including schools and universities, have been decimated, and numerous religious sites, such as churches and mosques, have been completely destroyed. Control over the Rafah border crossing further restricts access to essential supplies, including fuel, preventing the functioning of vital services, and as a result, approximately 70% of Gaza's infrastructure lies in ruins, intensifying thus the humanitarian crisis in the region. What label best describes this conflict? Is it a defensive war with Israel protecting itself? Or is it a campaign to suppress a people striving for independence? Sometimes I find it ironic when I discuss with European or American politicians, as I've done countless times in my diplomatic career. They continually advocate a two-state solution, while Palestine faces increasing destruction. Despite this reality, the rhetoric persists. If they truly support a two-state solution, why do they wield veto power, i.e. the United States and the United Nations, especially when nearly 147 countries have recognized Palestine? Moreover, Europe often follows the lead of the United States in this matter, raising questions about the balance in their approach to the two-state solution. Today, Palestinians are advocating for fundamental human principle of self-determination. And the question arises as to why the global community universally supports self-determination as articulated in President Woodrow Wilson's 16th article. Yet this principle is often disregarded in the context of Palestine. This prompts reflection on whether Palestinians are perceived as deserving less consideration in their quest for recognition as an independent nation state within the international community. During the inception of the Zionist project in Palestine, the region was already significantly developed compared to neighboring areas. Infrastructure such as harbors, airports, as well as a thriving economy and agriculture were already established. Contrary to the claims made by figures like Prime Minister Golda Meir, who stated that the desert bloomed only after the arrival of the Zionists, historical evidence suggests otherwise. There are documented records supporting the assertion that the region was already prosperous before the onset of the Zionist movement. This enduring conflict, which has persisted for many years, has not adequately stirred the conscience of the global community. It has often been regarded as a regional dispute or a conflict between two parties vying for the same territory. However, Palestinians assert that they are not contesting the land, but they are asserting the rightful ownership. They view Zionists as intruders who have sought to control their homeland. Therefore, the conflict is not simply a matter of competing claims over shared land. It is perceived as an incursion by Israel. The Zionist endeavor received backing from the international community, which bears the brunt of responsibility to reverse the consequences of such actions. The discourse on the practices associated with this contentious occupation could extend for hours. Yet the crux of the matter is clear. How can we bring about an end to this conflict? Moreover, who are the primary stakeholders endeavoring to forge a resolution? It's frustrating that despite positioning itself as the gavel holder of the peace process for the last 3 decades, the United States has faltered, resorting more to crisis management than conflict resolution. Presently, it's evident that the US has failed dismally in its role as an honest broker for peace, as it has disproportionately supported unequivocally Israel, the dominant party, over Palestine, the marginalized counterpart. Regrettably, Our faith in the Americans has been misplaced. I feel sorry for the American citizens who are governed by such ineffective leadership in the United States with a myopic vision to fostering global security and peace. A president advocating for humanitarian access is paradoxically sending thousands of bombs, resulting in the deaths of innocent children and Palestinians in Gaza. How can we tolerate such senile statements from a president who seems out of touch with reality? Sadly, the alternative isn't any more promising. In the current global landscape, the notion of using individuals or countries as mere pawns in international conflicts is increasingly deemed untenable. While such conflicts have the potential to escalate into regional or even global wars, the root causes often trace back to fundamental issues like extreme hunger, abject poverty, lack of economic development, and national interest. Therefore, a question arises. What implications would the recognition of Palestine as a state hold for the international community? Notably, Palestine has previously demonstrated willingness to compromise, as evidenced by its acceptance of only 22% of historic Palestine for statehood in 1988, and this territory encompasses the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, while the remaining 78% was accorded to the Zionist project. Despite this heavy compromise, the cost for further territorial expansion, particularly in the West Bank, persists among the Israelis. That said, it is important to note that Israel's interest in Gaza primarily revolves around security considerations, accessibility to oil, rather than territorial ambitions. Over the past 2 decades, there has been a notable absence of effective and charismatic global leadership, contributing to a sense of stagnation or decline amidst ongoing conflicts, hunger, and injustice. This raises the questions about the quality of democratic representation and the influence of political parties in shaping leadership choices. Despite the abundance of intellectual and institutional resources in the United States, exemplified by renowned think tanks and academic institutions like Harvard, Yale, Columbia, etc., the presidential candidacy of figures like Biden and Trump is viewed by some as impotent and ineffective. This highlights concerns about the dominance of political elites over the electoral process rather than genuine grassroots leadership. The effectiveness of the United States mediator to bridge the gap and inequity between two sides that are not on equal footing is called into question. Negotiations between Israel and Palestine, the imbalance in power dynamics is evident. The United States, holding a dominant position, often drafted resolutions favoring Israel, leaving the Palestinians with little choice but to comply. This lack of parity undermines the essence of genuine negotiations, which ideally involve symmetric negotiations between two contending powers, striving to resolve their differences. However, in this context, negotiations were dictated more by power politics than by sincere dialogue. The Palestinians, as the underdog party, consistently bore the brunt of these imbalances. The current state of demonstrations in Israel appear misleading. However, it's crucial to understand the broader public sentiment. There has been a significant shift in Israeli public opinion since the first Intifada of 1987, with a predominant support for right-wing leadership. The influence of left progressive elements has totally diminished, leading to their marginalization within the political landscape. The emergence of figures like Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and Netanyahu in positions of power reflects this right-wing trend. Consequently, the potential for a more liberal government advocating for peace has been hindered by the prevailing right-wing sentiments in Israel. The adage, charity starts at home, rings true in this context. The stability of the region hinges on the United States adopting an impartial policy instead of the double standards it has demonstrated thus far. On the one hand, attempting to have peace with our neighboring governments, that Israel is only surgical when it deals with Hamas, but one can plainly see the ramifications of that. there is a risk of instigating wider conflicts with Egypt probably, Lebanon for sure, and Iran. Despite the situation being contained thus far, the failure of the US to bring a ceasefire has compromised its total credibility. The current situation in Israel is very volatile, with escalating tensions suggesting a perilous path. There are observers expressing the belief that the destruction of Israel is underway, highlighted by recent events such as student protests in America. These protests unveil a broader critique of Biden's administration's handling of international conflicts, including the Gaza crisis and the Ukraine war. Pundits view this as indicative of a larger pattern of failure in asserting American dominance on the global stage. Drawing parallels, today the impetus for conflict is often rooted in national and economic interest rather than in pure ideology. However, the zealous commitment of individuals driven by religion remains a concern to us. It is important to prevent any potential escalation into a religious conflict, particularly between Muslims and Jews. Our focus is on the pursuit of a national struggle guided by a secular ideology of establishing a democratic entity in Palestine, which aligns itself with the beliefs of our leadership. Yet this vision necessitates collective efforts, including presidential and legislative elections in Palestine, as well as comprehensive reform in our political infrastructure. I say the above as self-criticism because I have to be honest as an academic in order to outline the major steps required to realistically attain sustainable and lasting peace. Finally, embracing the LaRouche concept of economic development as espoused by the Schiller Institute could play a pivotal role in creating global security through regional security, through resolving long-standing conflicts, such as the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. By prioritizing economic ties over military solutions, nations from the north to the south can embrace a win-win approach that promotes global stability and prosperity. I wish the conferees all the good luck in their endeavors, and I hope my message is loud and clear, and let's work all together for peace, stability, through economic stability, and through what we call the LaRouche concept, which is the Oasis plan. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.